What's up, guys? In the last video, I talked about the skins match at the Beaver State Fling, which I helped with as far as taking both radar speeds and range finding. And the very next day, and 2 days after that, I had the distinct pleasure of being invited by Disc Golf Network and by Ian Anderson and Philo Braithwaite to help them with the coverage, doing something that, as far as I know, has never ever been done with live coverage before: live radar speeds from the field. I had a little spreadsheet in front of me on my phone alongside my pocket radar, and as soon as I got a reading, I would immediately enter that into the spreadsheet, and Ian back in the booth would be able to see it and read it out on the broadcast, which to the best of my knowledge has never been done before. And hopefully for those who watched that coverage live, it was a really kind of cool extra component. So doing those speeds allowed me once again to be up close, front and center, watching some of the best players in the world throw the disc. So in round one, the card that I observed, which was, I guess, essentially the feature card at that point, although it was round one, consisted of Nate Sexton, Gannon Buhr, Eagle McMahon, and Garrett Gurthie. Quite a foursome. And a real contrast in styles, actually, and kind of a bit of a generational thing, because Garrett and Nate, of course, are players from an earlier generation. I guess Eagle is a bit of a kind of cross-generational player because he's now in his mid-20s, I think. And he's been pro for about a decade. And then finally you have Gannon Buhr, the wonder kid who can do everything apparently. And on the card, they all kind of threw about exactly what I would expect. Nate Sexton has been playing Nate Sexton Golf. It's literally kind of named after the guy for most of his career. And Nate Sexton Golf is a forehand thrown in the usually 60 to 64, 65 mile an hour range, and a backhand that's about the same. If I had to guess, I think Nate can throw the backhand a little harder than he can throw the forehand, but they're both right about mid-60s, which means with proper shaping, those shots can go about 430, 440 in the field. If he needs to throw lasers, they're around 400 feet, 410. And of course, Nate has impeccable control and incredible mastery at every part of the game. He is always a joy to watch no matter what the outcome. Number two on that card in terms of power production, actually, even though he's known as Mr. Distance, was Garrett Gurthie, who I've been watching Garrett since he was a much younger player, actually, when he was kind of coming into the sport around the same time as Paul Macbeth. And Garrett's form has always been scrutinized among disc golf biomechanical aficionados as an embodiment of efficiency and leverage, and more importantly, using gravitational energy to add to the stomping mechanism, which he then translates into his incredibly beautiful biomechanical swing, where his arm is like sweeping away from him, producing insane leverage. And even though Garrett is not a big guy, he's 5'8". If I had to guess how much he weighed, I would guess like 145 to 150 pounds. He's not a big dude, actually, although he's gotten way more muscular and more sort of fit over the years as I think he's gotten more devoted to the sport. But Garrett, unfortunately, is 5'8", and at 5'8", you do not have the same leverage advantages. And even though he's able to squeeze every available inch of power out of his body, his speed tends to top out, at least on the course, around 70 to 71 miles an hour, unless he hits the disc super perfect and super late. And that's kind of exactly what he did. When he was throwing controlled shots, he tended to throw in the roughly 66, 67 mile per hour range, which is more than enough for what you need in most situations. That's a 425, 430 foot long golf shot. And then ratcheting up in the ability on the card, number, I guess, 2 in power production on the card was Eagle McMahon, same guy that I just watched the day before on the skins event. And Eagle did exactly what Eagle does. He plays the same exact kind of golf. He throws controlled shots in the low 70s. When he wants to power up, he throws 76, 77 miles an hour. He can still absolutely, honestly, make your jaw drop with what he can do in power production. There's this one hole where you throw down a tunnel about 300 feet, and then the basket is around the corner. It's an insanely hard par 3 because it's 450, but you have to go around a gigantic corner. And the only way to get up to the pin is to throw either super tight hugging shot, which is what Garrett did, where it makes the turn and then planes out and lands there, or you just go around the whole thing, which is what Eagle did, because he can throw 77 miles an hour. So he went up and landed pin high, and it's, of course, a sight to see. And then the final guy on the card, of course, Gannon Buhr, and he's just a wonder to watch, a real joy. I hung out with him a little bit. I actually had him at one point help me troubleshoot, I think it was Google Sheets or something, because I couldn't get the thing to load. I asked Gannon if he had an opinion about that. And anyway, Gannon played Gannon golf, very, very similar to Eagle, actually, although a little bit powered down. He did dial back his power. He said to me a few times, or at least announced to the crowd, that he was, quote unquote, weak. And it's interesting to hear him say that because it sounds self-deprecating, but I think what that actually means is that Gannon understands the limitations of his body physically. He knows that the leverage that he produces and the energies are very hard on his current frame. So he is intentionally, I think, dialing down the power right now. But when his body gets more robust and strong, he is going to be killing the disc. So I watched all those guys through the speeds to the booth, kind of figured it out by the end. And on day 2, it was a completely different cast of characters. It was, from memory, Calvin Heimberg on the card, Ricky Wysocki, 2 gigantic titans of the game. There was another guy I've never seen live before and hadn't actually heard about him, named AJ Carey. And then finally, there was Matt Bell, who's been in the game for ages as well. And Matt Bell has a really, really interesting skill set. The guy can really crush, actually. I was very surprised to see how fast he could throw based on how his form looked to my eyes. But he has a highly, highly adapted and specialized version of the more rotational form that was kind of how people learned the sport years and years ago when Matt Bell was coming up as a player. Despite that, Matt Bell could throw 68 miles an hour, and he could throw 64 to 65 all the time when he was trying to hit a golf line, which is incredibly impressive to be able to produce that kind of energy when you're mostly rotating the disc. One tier above him, actually, was AJ Carey. This guy he reminded me, honestly, a lot of a slightly bigger version of Emerson Keith. I think if I had to guess, AJ Carey is probably about 5'7", and not a particularly big guy, but God, his power production was insane. He's so efficient and so braced that AJ Carey could throw 73 miles an hour on demand whenever he threw the disc hard. His bullet, like his locus of energy, when he's producing all of his swings straight into here, it would come out at 73 miles an hour like clockwork. And in fact, when he threw 74, which he was capable of doing, and he did it several times, he would release the disc a little bit later and be unhappy with the result, actually. 2 times he went, and he was upset because he had shanked the shot and it came out at 74 miles an hour. So he got a little bit later release, and that was actually off his trajectory. And then we've got, of course, the 2 crushers in order of power production based on historical data, although it may not be the same anymore. Calvin Heimberg, who can throw 74, 75 when he's really laying into the disc, and has the 71, 72 just utterly dialed. He can throw that speed with a single step from the fairway. And watching Calvin lace these like 430, 440 foot shots that hover like 8 feet off the ground is such a profoundly, almost surreal effect. The way that I visualize is it looks like the disc is actually attached to the end of like a bungee cord. And there's a bungee cord tied to a tree that's like 450 feet away. And all Calvin's doing is just pulling back on it and letting go, because that's how the disc moves. It goes boing, and it just flies in a dead straight line until it finally settles straight. It's such a crazy weapon for him to have. And Wysocki can basically throw the same kind of throws. I would say that he historically is a little bit more powerful than Calvin. Ricky has thrown as fast as 77 miles an hour on camera in competition, and I would say that he throws a little slower than that now, dialed down to maybe 72, 73, which again seems to be the sweet spot where all the pros wind up. So totally cool to watch those guys play. It was a battle the whole time. And again, a bit of a clash of styles between Matt Bell, the older player, and then the 3 more modern players. And finally, we get to the last round of the tournament. And back from the original feature card was Gannon Buhr. Of course, you cannot stop that guy. Number 2 on the card was, I'm doing this from memory here, Calvin Heimberg, of course, contesting yet another tournament. And with right next to him was another player who I had not seen play live before, although I had seen him play on video, Ezra Robinson, the brother of Isaac Robinson. And honestly, those 2 guys could be almost the same person in terms of how they play disc golf. So similar shot shaping, similar force production. I would say Isaac's a little bit taller than Ezra, but they're very, very similar in height overall. They both are just masterful players, and I'm sure both Ezra and his brother Isaac have many, many tournament wins in their future. And then finally, last guy on the card, Luke Humphreys. How about that? The MC of GK Pro. The guy that I'd been hanging out with the day before when he was MCing the skins event was on the lead card on the final day, kicking ass. And Luke looked to me in terms of his game, he was kind of like a more powerful version of Matt Bell. Very similar throwing style, actually. And Luke could throw a little bit harder, although he did top out at 68 as well. It was amazing watching Luke's ability to get that form to produce power right when he wanted it. You could see him actually using the increasing weight of the disc to create the resistance out to the point where he needed to throw. So when Luke really needed to lay into the disc, he would swing in this arc so late, but knew exactly where to release it so that it came out at the right spot. And it would, I imagine his shot selection was predicated a lot on whatever disc he intended to use, or vice versa. So he would change discs all the time based on how much power he needed to produce. He had it all figured out, and his mastery of the game is extremely high. Very, very cool to watch. It was just a wonderful event to spectate, both as a fan and as the data guy. I'm super grateful to Ian, to Philo, and of course to DGN for allowing me to participate in that way. I would love to do it again, guys, next year. If you watched the Beaver State Fling live, I'm sure you had a good time. If you haven't watched it yet, watch the Jomez coverage, which is, I believe, already online. And I will have more to come very soon. I've got one more video coming that relates to a lot of these guys for something that happened last Friday. So stay tuned for that. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Take care.